Hello, I'm wearing a lab coat. That means I am a scientist. And as a scientist, I'm here to tell you, you don't like films. You like music. I like Blade Runner. It's probably more accurate to say that I love Blade Runner, but somewhere deep down inside, I also kind of know that Blade Runner really isn't that good. For a large part of the film, very little happens. Characters aren't well developed, the relationships between the Nexus 6 make almost no sense, and Harrison Ford's Deckard is honestly just kind of creepy.
How about new?
I also hated Blade Runner 2049 for reasons that I'd love to discuss some other time. But I still love Blade Runner. So for the longest time, I have just assumed that the reason I like the film is because of nostalgia. That was until I did some reading this week that left me wondering if maybe the reason I love Blade Runner is just the music. And that maybe the role of music in film is much more subtle and pervasive than audiences tend to give it credit for. For context, academics and critics have written about sound and music's role in cinema for almost 100 years, and even then, they wrote about it as if it had already been written about for a long time. For instance, in a paper from 1929, Harry Alan Potemkin writes that music has been associated with the movie since the latter's prehistoric days. In the intervening 100 years, critics and theorists have discussed music in film, but largely have understood film as a predominantly visual medium that also happened to have sound. Theorists like Christian Metz understood film as made up of 5 domains of information: text, speech, visuals, music and sound. And he's one of the few theorists that includes music and sound, seemingly just out of completeness' sake. Film theorist and philosopher Gilles Deleuze, by comparison, understood film as powerfully characterized by images, with the way images are arranged in film having powerful ramifications on the viewer. However, more recent approaches to cinema have experimented with new methods of understanding the medium. In a paper from 2007, researchers described a relatively simple experiment in which audience members were shown film clips with music being played before or after. The clips showed actors making faces that suggested certain emotions. However, what the researchers found was that audiences were more likely to associate the clip with the emotional cues they received from the music rather than the visual content included within the film. This goes some way to explaining why I like Blade Runner, because the images on screen are influenced by the amazing music. I have been primed to understand Creepy Deckard as being Cool Guy Deckard, because nobody could be creepy when they sound like this. Now, while this experiment is really interesting, it's got a lot of problems. Research from elsewhere in cognitive science shows us that humans can't really and consistently associate images of facial expressions with specific emotions. As such, it's difficult to say just how much this experiment with film clips and music is a really accurate depiction of how audiences engage with movies and sound, because films tend to provide a lot more context. However, this hasn't stopped researchers from continuing to publish new papers that further the way sound is understood in cinema. In 2014, the collection The Social Science of Cinema was published. In it, researcher of singing and film music Annabel Cohen provided an amazing summary of how cognitive science can explain just why music plays such an important role in our emotional relationship to cinema. She explains that music informs our emotional engagement due to the mechanisms humans use to construct memories. Because we're forming short-term and long-term memories at the same time, there's frequently crosstalk between the two. In other words, while watching a film, audiences are constantly piecing together the significance of the images they're shown, attempting to create long-term memories about the film experience. These are the same tools you'll use to understand a lecture or read a book. However, simultaneously, your body is taking in all sorts of extrasensory stimuli, such as sounds and smells. These are processed through short-term memory, but frequently, Cohen suggests, short-term memories are passed up to long-term memory, influencing our associations after the fact. In the end, we can understand what Cohen suggests by saying something like, music fills in for the environmental stimulus we would have in usual real-life situations. The inexplicable vibes you get from meeting someone that can make you feel safe or make you feel uncomfortable. Film music and sound hijacks the parts of the brain that are searching for environmental cues and keeps them busy, influencing the way that we interpret the images on screen. That's why, after all these years, while a big part of me knows that Blade Runner is just a bad movie, when I try to think about it, I'm overwhelmed with the positive associations that come from the amazing Vangelis film score. I've basically been brainwashed to ignore the long stretches of the film where nothing happens, that the plot makes very little sense, and that Deckard is just creepy because, well, listen to that saxophone.
Okay, so thank you so much for watching that. If you did watch that, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Look, there's so much else to say about this. Obviously, I'm just being, trying to stir up some debate to hope that people will give some comments and things like that. If you think that there's much more to why you enjoy films other than just music infiltrating your brain like a parasite, please let me know. I'm not a scientist. This is just some reading. So, your opinion matters more than mine. Thank you.